Keep her in line.
While we're there.
That's right. Great to see everyone this evening. Excited about us being together and the exercise we're going to do tonight. If obviously you're going to need a booklet. This isn't one of those things you can share one, so you need your own. And secondly, you're going to need a pen or a pencil in order to participate with what we're going to do tonight. And I think we even have extra pens or pencils back in the back in case you need that. So tonight we're going to talk about something that probably Christians rarely do, and yet it is one of the most important parts of Bible study. Without this exercise, we miss the really important parts of studying books of the Bible. We look at details in a book. If you've probably done what many do, we're going to study Romans next week, and so everybody get ready for the first chapter, and we get back together and we study the first chapter. And by doing so, we concentrate on details and sometimes see so many of the details that we don't see the message and we miss the main point. Imagine me going to, taking my kids like I did in 2010 to Yellowstone, and we pull into the park and we pay our fees and they hand us a map. And I take the map and I go, hey kids, would you throw the map in the trash? We're not going to do that. And I stop at the nearest tree and say, come on. We go out here and I said, look at this beetle going up the tree. Isn't that something? Now you've seen Yellowstone when you've seen that. All right, that's kind of what we do sometimes in our Bible study. We're picking apart every little part. We're getting into the text, and we certainly need to. But in so doing, we have not backed up to see the big picture of what is going on. So that's what we're going to work on tonight. I'm going to give you a little introduction, and then we're going to do our exercise. And you, of course, just like last night, are going to be the stars of the game tonight in telling us what you have seen. So Bible study should always begin with seeing the whole before we execute the parts. We want to image the whole. By the way, one of the things we mentioned earlier, when you are reading a letter, if you got a letter from someone, especially if it was someone you were in love with, and they sent you a love letter, you would not read the first paragraph and then spend 2 weeks studying the first paragraph. You would read the whole thing, and then you go back and enjoy it a little slower, and then you go back and look at even more, and if you're like my wife, you save them in the attic so that she can pull them out and embarrass me. So that's what you do. So survey study, then analytical study. Obviously, you want background information. Everybody knows this. You're trying to look at getting an idea of what is going on, when it is written, who to whom it is written, etc. But we still want to go further than that, and we want to understand why this is so important. So first of all, it's like if you went to the movies and they have an hour of coming attractions, drive you crazy. Just show me the movie. And all these coming attractions, and we're going to do this, and most of them you see and you go, well, I'm certainly not going to go see that. Well, I'm not going to go see that. And then certainly when pretty soon some great G-rated movie comes up and you go, maybe I'll got to go see that. But you get a preview of what's going on so that it excites you to see the rest of the message. So it gives context to each part of the book. It's like a map at Yellowstone. So what we really did is we paid a lot of attention to the map. We spent 3 days there and we marked out each section of Yellowstone. And therefore, at any given time, wherever we were, we could open the map and go, here we are in the relation to everything else. And that's what you're doing when you're surveying a book and seeing the big picture. You're putting context to each section so that during your study you can always stop and say, where am I on the map? What's going on at this particular point in my study? So it enables you also to discover the purpose of a book, the primary message of the book. I mentioned this to you also earlier in the week. Somebody asked you, where in the Bible would I read about what it takes to be a disciple of Christ? What does it look like to actually be a disciple of Christ? What book in the Bible spends most of the book telling us the kind of sacrifice and the way we ought to look at our discipleship before the Lord? You might choose a couple of books, but one that would come to my mind would be 2 Corinthians. And the reason I know that is because I've studied 2 Corinthians a lot, and because I would have done survey charts on 2 Corinthians to see what the major picture is. By doing the chart, it reminds me and it sticks in my mind. If you did this with all 66 books, you would be able for somebody to say to you, Zechariah, what's it about? What's going on? What's the main point? And within just 2 or 3 lines, you could explain what was happening. You could do that to any book of the Bible, and that should be a goal that you have, so that you have the whole Bible together. By doing survey charts of 66 books, you will have a written and visual map of that. And so we'll, of course, going to practice that, and you can see how that would be. So that navigates your study throughout the future. Now, what's the survey process look like? So here's what we're going to do, what we would want to do in a survey. First, it's read, read, read. That's how you do a survey. You read the book. Now, you have 2 main readings of the book. The first would be in one sitting, if possible, and all you're trying to do is ask and answer the question, why was this written? Why was this written? Like if I said Ephesians, why was this written? Or Galatians, why was this written? And that's all you're doing. You're just reading through, I've got to find the answer to this question. And then you're going to go back and you're going to read through again a second time, a little slower, and you're going to start looking for organization and outline and how the author reached his goal. Now again, in both of these here, you'll notice neither one of them am I going into a detailed study of the content of the book. I'm doing a cursory reading. Kind of like, we don't have newspapers anymore, but you might read the news online. And if you're like me, I kind of look at it and go, got it, next, got it, next. And then sometimes I go, I got to slow down and read this. This is interesting, you know. But you're just looking at what is really going on, and you're having to get some kind of picture of what is happening and what the message is. So first, why was this written? Second, what's the organization? How does he go about revealing this particular message? What do I see that keeps coming up? Maybe repetition and those sorts of things. Primarily, you play Jeopardy with the Bible, with the text. In Jeopardy, if you know the great game show, I hope everybody keeps watching Jeopardy, otherwise I can't use this illustration anymore. So in Jeopardy game show, of course, you have the answers, and you have to come up with the question. So God has the answers in the book. You got to come up with the question. And so like when Paul says concerning the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians 7 and verse 1, he says, now concerning the things that you wrote to me. So when I'm reading chapter 7 and maybe following some of the other chapters, I'm saying, what did they write to him? And how am I going to conclude what they wrote to him? I'm going to have to conclude it by the answers that he's giving. And the first one in chapter 7 is, they're asking some questions about whether I ought to be married and what's going on, and this sort of thing. Whether I should be married if I'm married to an unbeliever. Should I keep that marriage? So I can figure out the questions by seeing the answers. And that's pretty typical in any book where you can basically play Jeopardy with the text that way. Now here is a simple example of a survey chart. And if you will note on the chart, I might just step here and do this. You know, on the chart, the first thing that I've done here is I've got a section. I've made these large sections. This is why I call this a simpler survey chart. This is a large section, 1 through 10, 2:10, and I say that's Peter's first main section. His second section, 2:11 through 3:12. Third section, 3:13 through 5:20. And all I'm wanting to discover, at first, of course, this was all blank, and all I'm wanting to discover is what's 2 or 3 main things in each section that this is about. So that when I look at it, I go, okay, so Peter starts with this, then he goes to this, then he goes to this. And then I want to summarize those by maybe a phrase. Like the first part, he uses the word a living hope, and what that living hope is. He talks then about pilgrims and sojourners, which they were exiles, and then he talks about the fiery trials about to come. At the top, I decide, well, let me give a little more detail with this so that I can highlight what's going on. Submitting is the key part of that section. Suffering and salvation and being holy is the key part of this one. And glory after suffering is the key part of this one. And then I figure out who these recipients are. Exiles from Rome living in northern Asia Minor. I assign a key verse. And finally, after it's all done, I want to give a theme to it or a title to 1 Peter, Living Amid Trials as Strangers and Exiles on the Earth. So I put all that together so that when I have completed it, I have an idea of 1 Peter. Now, most important, that chart right there for you does you absolutely hardly any good at all. And the reason is I made it. You didn't. It's the process of researching and studying and writing it down is the way you actually are going to learn from it and cause you to remember it. I always remember it because I did it. And you will remember it when you do it. That will cause it to really stick in your minds. But you could have every one of my survey charts and look at them once a day, and you might not remember what 1 Peter's about until you've actually gone through it and made it your own. Make sense? Okay? So that's what a simple 1 Peter chart. Here's my preferred 1 Peter chart. Okay? This is where I'm starting, and I went through the book and I looked at major paragraphs. You can see at the bottom where those are. So just the major paragraphs throughout the letter. And I don't know how many of those are, but I figured it all out. Then I drew a parallelogram and put the line. Somebody says, how come you didn't put it this way? Well, because if it's angled like that, I can write on it and still read it. I can write in this direction, have plenty of room, and still read it. If I put it straight up and down, then I have it turn upside down to write it, and I don't want to do that. And by the way, if you have a Word on a PC computer, it'll draw that. You can draw just about anything on that. So there's a lot of different ways. I used to do it back in the olden days, guys. You over here, I'm especially talking to you. Back when we had a computer that had filled a whole building just to send us the moon, I didn't have one of those. So what I had to do is actually draw it. I don't know if you've ever drawn anything yet. But anyway, that's how that works. And so then once I've done this, then I just go fill that in. Okay? Like, here's the beginning, to the elect exiles of the dispersion. And I write in a key summation. Big point here. You're not trying to write in everything that paragraph said. You're just trying to give a summary for you that will help you remember what it said. So I go through that whole letter. Just suppose you went through all of 1 Peter and you filled in each of those and had an idea mainly of what it's about. You didn't go into big interpretation. You didn't go into big, I wonder what that means. You didn't do any of that. You just wrote down basically the content all the way through. If you just stopped there, how well do you think you'd know 1 Peter? You'd do pretty good. You know, you'd have a pretty good idea of what 1 Peter's about. You have written the main sections of the book. Then you take a next step and you say, well, okay, I want to fill this in. As we said, summary, do summaries here at the bottom and specifics like we had in the simpler chart. I'll put that in there, and then I'm going to add to this key verses over here, even a quotation up here and a quotation over here. And the things, remember, we've talked about before. If you want a theme of a book, look at the beginning, look at the end. A lot of times the theme is bookended by statements by the apostles who have written it. So when I see things at the end, he started by talking about you're grieved by various trials. He ended by, after you've suffered, he will restore, confirm, and strengthen and establish you. So trials bookend this letter. And all the way through, he's talking about how to deal with those trials. And so that's just a simple way to do it. Here's an Ezekiel. Here's a large book, 48 chapters in Ezekiel. Here's a very, very large book, and I've summarized how that book plays out in a more simple chart. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to do 2 Peter. Okay? So we're going to do it together. I'm going to do it with you, and we'll take a few minutes on each of these 3 sections, and then we'll discuss what we discovered. All right? So let me give you, since we're doing a fairly large section here, like a whole chapter, let me give you a little hint on how to do this. Look at the large paragraphs there. Like, for example, in chapter 1, you see, after the introduction there, you see verse 3, that sets up the foundation for this and goes down through verse 11. So start with, let me write a quick summary of 3, 1 through 11, or chapter 1, 3 through 11. And then go to verse 12 down through verse 15 is the next paragraph, and then verse 16 through 21, next paragraph. So just try to put 3 summaries there. And then see what is that about and be able to, you can jot anything you down. Here's the cool thing about this. You're not answering questions. And I know your first thought is, well, I don't know how to do something if I'm not answering questions. No, in this, you are a pilgrim. You are a person who's discovering. You're going and you're looking and you're finding a brand new path. And you're looking to see what the path is like, and you're writing it down. And why is this important? Our first lesson. Because first-hand discovery of the Bible's precious truths are what are going to light you up and cause you to get excited. If you just answer a question, if I wrote the question, you're just looking for what I saw. That's second-hand discovery. It's not fun. And there's nobody here that thinks it's fun. So let's quit doing it. Let's get into our text and discover the mind of God. All right, any questions before we start? Any questions? So you learn mostly by doing it. And do not get frustrated and intimidated, because the fun part about it is you write down what's in the Scripture, you're never wrong. Isn't that nice? All right? We're good? All right, let's take about 7 minutes or so and just read through. You're doing a kind of a cursory reading, remember? You're not trying to understand all the details. Just get the highlight of what's going on. All right? Let's go. Okay, let's see how you did. You couldn't lose, right? You didn't have to answer a question, so you can't be wrong. That's the cool thing. All right, how did somebody volunteer to start us out on how you gave your summary of chapter 1 of 2 Peter here? Yes, sir.
Well, there's a big contrast that happens like 3 or 4 times where it goes back from what is perishable versus what is precious, what is perishable versus what is imperishable. So it's showing...
Are you in 1 Peter or 2 Peter?
1 Peter?
That's a really good observation and a great summation of chapter 1 of 1 Peter. You scared me for a minute there, I think. Boy, I read the wrong 2 Peter. But that's excellent. If we were doing 1 Peter, you nailed it. There is that contrast. Very good. Okay, I'm so sorry. All right, somebody else want to give it a try. In 2 Peter. Yes, sir.
The knowledge of Jesus should transform us to reflect his nature.
Okay, good. So this is really about us taking on the divine nature. He's granted to us to be able to take on this divine nature. That's a pretty good, simple summary of what one of his main concerns in this chapter. Okay, it might leave one main thing out that as to the reason he wants this, but still, that's a really good start. Go.
Going with that, so it has key verses in 5 and 12. It has for this and therefore. So partakers of the divine nature for this reason, increase in holiness, maturity. Therefore, and he reminds him he's dying soon, so he wants to remind him that he saw God on the mountain. Listen to God's word. Nature.
Good.
Increase God's word.
Witnesses. Yeah. Good. Excellent. So you notice how he put that together. It's a very simple outline of that. Because he's granted us to be able to be partakers of the divine nature, we are therefore for this reason to grow in these things, to make our calling and election sure, and he's about to die, so he wanted to remind them of this so that they could always recall it after he died. And then somebody tell me what was the main reason he wanted all that to happen, other than he wanted them to... What does he say at verse 16 and following? What's that groundwork behind all that? Okay, but start off. Verse 16 starts with what word? For. In other words, here's what I'm really concerned about. What's he concerned about?
That they know that where it came from.
And that
They were eyewitnesses.
And there were eyewitnesses. And it's not a myth.
Yeah.
We didn't tell you fables. We didn't tell you a myth. We were eyewitnesses of this. We heard his voice in the holy mountain, all of this. So we are trying to confirm this with you. We want you to grow because there's myths that are going around, and we want you to know that this is solid and stable, and you don't have to worry about whether or not we told you the truth. We were eyewitnesses, and we heard his voice from heaven. So there's that little, that flow right there, right? And at the very end, he does something that's going to connect us to chapter 2. He talks about how prophecy is given. And it's not given by men, it was given when holy men of God were moved by the Holy Spirit. Okay? So there's a pretty good flow. Anybody want to add anything to that you thought was important that you wrote on yours? Okay? Yeah?
I was just at the beginning where he says he's called us to his glory and excellence, and then he tells about the transfiguration. You can see how
Yeah, good.
very clearly connected together.
That's a cool observation there. Now, see, one of the things, once you've gone through it, and we could sit here for a while and really discuss a whole lot of details, but I want to, when I'm doing a chart, I want to keep myself from going too much further than what we've done, right? Because the main thing is not to get into the details yet. What's happened already, though, just in the first chapter, is I got a taste for it. I want to go back and learn more about that. Wonder why he said that. Wonder why he said that. I might even have a piece of paper next to me and just, I got to write down some questions that I want to later study in more detail. Something like that is great. But right now, I'm just getting a taste of what's there, and I'm wanting to just summarize it. And it's really hard to hold yourself back, especially if you're used to jumping in those details. But don't do that yet. Step back, let it go for now. See the whole letter. You want to see connections through the letter, not specifically so much the content yet. Make sense? Okay? So that's what I'm going to do. Let's do chapter 2. You'll tell chapter 2 is not as hard as chapter 1, really. But do chapter 2. Okay, let's see what you came up with on this one. Somebody want to give us a go on how you looked at chapter 2? What is the main point, or a couple of two or three main points that are highlighting chapter 2?
Beware of false prophets.
Okay, beware of false prophets. Anything else?
It seems like that there's going to be sinners in our midst, and God's going to know how to take care of them, and He's going to know how to deliver those who are righteous.
Okay, good. I love the fact that you noticed in our midst. It's in our midst. This isn't talking about, these false teachers outside. These are rising up within them. These false teachers are going to rise up among you. And God is capable of rescuing the godly and keeping the ungodly under punishment. Good summation of that. Somebody else.
Don't waste the blessing that Jesus gives you. And is what I see.
Okay. Where does he say that?
What's that?
Where does he say that?
He just says, once you know Jesus, if you go back, it's going to be worse than if you never knew him. So
Okay. So like you're taking the very end there and summarizing. This is so important that if you aren't careful, you will end up in a worse condition than you were before. Okay, great warning at the end. That's right. Very, very strong warning of where you don't want to go. Okay, good. Somebody else.
The word destruction comes up a lot, and they destroy others, and God will destroy them.
Good. So they are destructive in every way. And you notice he talks about, what we just mentioned, he talks about how these false teachers are going to be judged. Then he turns around and he gives descriptive terms, doesn't he? And they have been destructive. Now he gives descriptive terms of them and how they're going to be destructive. Yes, sir.
Throughout every dispensation, God will deliver his people.
Okay, good. Throughout every period of time, and he gives those examples, doesn't he? He gives examples of before that God has always rescued. And he rescued Lot, he rescued Noah, and he's going to rescue us as well. That's real comforting. Sometimes we look past that and just think in terms of the punishments of the wicked, but he's talking here about rescuing. Good point.
It gives a nice description for you to be able to identify those ones among you who are doing this.
Good. Those descriptions are really important. I think he really, you can say, there's false teachers. Can we get give me a little more of that? What are we looking for here? In one of my online classes where I have a number of unbelievers that are part of the class, we had a lengthy discussion this last Tuesday, just a couple days ago, about false teachers and how you spot them. And we were in 2 Corinthians, and of course the Corinthians were dealing with false preachers who were making money off of them. And I said, by the way, that's one of the key descriptions that Peter gives to a false teacher. They beg you for money, they want money. And one of the gals said, well, you mean like Joel Osteen? And I said, I think you've kind of hit that nail on the head pretty good. Yeah, I think that's good. And so she was really just, but it seems like he does a lot of good. And I said, well, what are we really looking for? We're looking for what's a false teacher. One of the main marks, ground level, is he tries to make money off of you. Have you ever seen him in a program without asking you to send him money? No, he always asks me to send money. I said, okay. Think about that. So trying to get people to see this is really, really important. By the way, just another point on that. I know I'm going off this a little bit. But in teaching people who aren't Christians, one of the biggest problems they have is actually believing that the world is filled with false teachers. Really hard for them to accept that. I mean, well, he's trying to do a lot of good, and he does this and he does this. Yeah, I don't really agree with that, but look what he's doing. He's trying. And it's so hard for them to look past the beautiful veneer that is placed before them.
Well, we can see that today with all the different denominations, because they all don't teach the truth. They might speak a word or two of truth,
Yeah.
but they're not preaching
Yeah.
the word of truth.
Yeah, and that's, of course, definition of false teacher, not following the truth. And so the big warning here that he gives through this, by the way, and boy, I hate to do this. See, this is a detail. But you notice how he refers to them as irrational animals, or the Old King James, brute beasts. In chapter 1, we're taking on the divine nature. In chapter 2, the ungodly have turned into just animals, just following every thing they want. So you're always looking for contrasts there. Did you connect chapter 1 with chapter 2? Could you see the connection? Verse 20 and through 21 and chapter 2, verse 1. What's the connection?
Those who speak the truth are not making this up. The false teachers are doing it for the personal gain.
Okay? So here's prophecy that comes through the Holy Spirit to men who have been moved by the Spirit. But then he goes, but there were false prophet arose, and there will be false teachers among you. One of the crazy things about Satan, if God does something, Satan does it 100 times more. If God has a prophet in the Old Testament, Satan does 800 prophets, with Ahab or something like that. Satan's always duplicating what God does to confuse us every single time. God makes a church. Satan says, I can make churches. I can make tons of them. Everything that happens is that way. Okay? Yes, sir.
I think verse 20 makes a strong connection between chapter 1 and 2, where he talks about them having escaped
Good.
the defilement of the world through the knowledge of our Lord and Savior. That really refers back
And he mentioned that in chapter 1. That's right. That's right. Excellent point. All right, let's do chapter 3. Okay, let's see how you do with this one. Pretty simple text, but you see the flow. What's going on? When somebody want to start us off?
I think verse 9 kind of summarizes the whole chapter to a degree.
Okay.
Where he says that the Lord is not slack concerning the promise, as some count slackness. That there's people who think just the fact that the Lord has not come yet means that he's not going to come. It's kind of the same opinion that the Jews had when the destruction had not occurred. They just thinking it wasn't going to occur. So God says that Peter says that God isn't on the same timetable as man.
Okay, so that reveals for us, doesn't it, what's the main teaching that these false teachers have been going by? What's the main thing they've been saying? Yeah, the Lord didn't come. He's not coming. There's not going to be a second coming. There's not going to be a judgment. Now can you understand why they're living the way they are back in chapter 2? Well, there's not going to be a judgment. As Paul said, let's eat, drink, and be merry. If there's not a resurrection and not a judgment, let's just, there's no sense in rules, no sense in anything. So he says, let's just have a heyday. So now at the end of the letter, he's actually revealed for us what the key teaching is, and he goes about answering that. Good. Okay? Somebody else want to add to that? Yes, sir.
The reason, in that same verse, the reason to this day that the world's still spinning, that God hasn't sent Christ back yet, is to give more time for more people to come to repentance, and more people to be reconciled to Him. And have the Lord.
Yeah, it's kind of like Peter says, you interpreted the Lord's quote-unquote slowness. You interpreted that as He's not coming. But the actual understanding is He loves you so much, He's patient. He doesn't want any to perish. He wants everybody to come to repentance. So you're seeing the character of the Lord now that He brings up here. Yes, sir.
I'm just thinking of the idea of if I'm reading this letter, and he just said, this is the second letter, I might pause and go grab that first letter and see where he talks about Noah in there as well. So like if I'm reading this letter,
yeah.
might we pause and then that builds upon itself.
In fact, along that point, the second letter in which he's doing what? Reminding. Have you noticed that word? Have you noticed now? At the beginning, he said in verse 12 of chapter 1, I'm writing this by way of reminder after my death. I want you to be able to recall it. He mentions it again now in chapter 3. This is a reminder. I want to be able to remind you. And even tells us that the first letter was a reminder. All right? And some preachers think that means that every 2 weeks I can re-preach a sermon. But no, just kidding. But it is a reminder. And this is a really important principle that thematically kind of ties this book together in a lot of ways. Yes, sir?
He wants us to make sure that we keep the strong faith.
Yeah.
With everything that's going on.
That's right.
He continues through, because it's been years and years and nothing has changed.
Yeah.
Except for the Word of God.
Yeah, don't get slack because you're interpreting God's slackness. There is no slackness going on here. That's exactly right. Paul?
He destroyed it once by water. It's not the first time he's going to destroy it. But he's already done it, he's going to do it again.
Yeah, they have deliberately overlooked a previous worldwide judgment. They've deliberately overlooked that. So if you think for 1 minute that God's not going to judge the world again, you just need to go back and be aware of the first judgment, that there has already been such a judgment. Exactly. Yes, sir.
I like how he started said you need to look at the old and look at the commands from the new and
isn't that great? That's just one of those things where like, I just gave you a summary of what's inspired. Prophets of old, apostles of new. And by the way, you don't need some other book. I mean, that just pretty well lays it out right there. And don't go to those myths. Don't go to all those things. So he really sets us up that, okay? Somebody spot, and it was almost mentioned here, but somebody spot his big main thing now that he's concerned about as he ends his letter. What's his big main thing as he ends the letter that he wants to really nail in their minds? Okay? Growth at the end and at the beginning, wasn't it? Say, remember we talked about what bookends this letter? Growth. He starts in the beginning, I want you to grow in these qualities. He ends it with grow in the grace and knowledge. He knows that growth is going to keep them from failure. Growth is going to keep them from falling prey to these unrighteous people. That's a real critical one. Just spot something else as far as how he wants them to live that fits into this. Yeah, holiness comes out of, since there's going to be this second coming, there's going to be this judgment, what sort of people do you think we ought to live in holy lives and godliness? Absolutely. You know, it's just like was mentioned with the destruction of Jerusalem. When Jesus talks about that in Matthew 24, he constantly is emphasizing, when's he coming? You don't know. And you need to be ready at all times. Don't sleep. Get ready. So the urgency of, this is a really hard one, isn't it? You know, if I'm just surveying the letter, I don't think I could help at the bottom just writing a conclusion. The urgency of something that I don't even know when will happen and has gone on for centuries, and yet the urgency for my own life to really push this. And that's what Peter's doing. You have got to grow. You have got to push yourself to do this, because this is really going to happen. He's going to return. And, you know, it's real strong message there. Okay? Now, so here's how, simple little summations that I gave for those 3 sections there. And once I've done that, as I said, then I want to go from there, and I like to put maybe 3 main summations at the bottom, 2 more broader summations at the top. And you can see how this would fit together, since I noticed the word reminder, that this is reminders. I said to myself, well, what's he reminding them of? First, in the first chapter, he reminds them of growth. Second chapter, he reminds them of false teachers. And the third chapter, he reminds them of the second coming. Okay, so you see how you could do that? It takes some thought at first, some meditation. How would I do this? But see what that does? It forces you to give big categories to your letter, so that you can get a, like we would say in preaching, when I study a text that I'm going to preach, I'm always looking for a handle, something that I can grab hold to and utilize it, and I can give it to you. So it's a handle that you can grab hold of it and go, I can keep that. I got the handle to it, and that's what I'm looking for here. And then broader summaries. He talked about in chapter 1 escaping the corruption of the world, and in chapter 2 and 3 he talked about how you overcome the corruption of the world. So I looked at those. You notice how I'm trying to use terms that are actually in the letter. I'm not trying to go off with making up some of my own terms. I'm trying to, as much as possible, use terms that truly are used in a letter, so that it gives me a better reminder. All right, and then finally, you could say, well, what title do I want to put to this? What would be my theme to this? I've changed themes. I changed the theme today as I was going over it. Reminders, do not be carried away by the error of the lawless. I keyed that off. Verse 17 of chapter 3. I thought, you know, that's a pretty good summation of his whole letter. Wonder why he put it at the end. Because it's a pretty good summation of his letter. And so I thought, well, let's use Peter's summation here. And here's his summation. I don't want you to be carried away by the error of the lawless. And then I love always putting in some key verses. In this case, 1:16, we're not following myths. 3:1, reminders about the second coming. So add that in, and you have a pretty good now survey chart of how this what this book looks like. Now, just doing what we did tonight, and this was very quick. You would normally may spend maybe a little longer than what we did on the chart, but this is a pretty straightforward, just 3 chapters, and so it's not too much different. But now you've done this. are you going to walk away and not know what 2 Peter's about? No. You got it, right? You got an overview of 2 Peter. You've got a taste even of, man, I want to go home and study more carefully this and this and this and this and these other things in 2 Peter. It stimulates now a detailed study. This is what I want to do. Like, okay, if Andy announced to the church, we're going to start a study of 2 Peter next week, what I would want to do is to say, maybe I'd hand out the blank chart and say, next week the first thing we're going to do is come together and discuss the overview of the book. Now we've got a grasp of where this is going. We're not lost. All the way through the first and second chapters, we're not lost about what's the major argument, that there's no second coming. But now if I've read the letter, summarized it, now I go, oh, okay. I already know where this is going. Now let me get in, let me have fun with the details. And I can fit every single detail into the major message. That keeps me from coming up with false teachings, erroneous interpretations, taking things out of context, because I already have the context. See how important that is? That's really good. I've even added to this some fun things. In the beginning, he said, you won't be barren or unfruitful if you grow in these things. At the end, he said, grow in the grace and the knowledge of the Lord. So I even want to add that in to give that. Here's a blank chart, a halfway blank chart of Romans. Give you a little idea of what that looks like throughout that letter and filling that in and what that would do for you. Here's how I did 1 Corinthians. You know, there were problems and there were questions. So I thought, well, that's kind of cool. You put at the bottom, well, where's the questions, where's the problems? And then the first part, it's been reported now concerning the things you wrote. The second part, and putting that together. And you can follow a chart like that. Here's one of my favorite. Here's a chart that covers Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. 11-day journey that took 40 years. En route to Canaan. Okay, so I just outlined that, and at the same time, you can see at Exodus, here's deliverance, 2 sections to Exodus. Leviticus, here's holiness, the key. I've given the key thematic points in each of the top on the green there. Here's Numbers, the test of the nation, and then reminders to the nation. So the deliverance of the nation, the holiness of the nation, the test of the nation, and then reminders of the nation. And you have a 40-year picture. The cool thing that I learned when I did this chart, you know how we talk about how long was the wilderness wanderings? And everybody goes 40 years. Very good. Did you know that 38 of the years are right here in this little section of Numbers, 15 through 21? And there was just 1 year up to that and 1 year after that? No, I didn't know that until I surveyed it and went through it and put it together and I went, wow. And you know how much he said in that 38 years? 0. In other words, all he said was, you guys are bigger creeps than you ever thought you were. Look at all the rebellion that you did, 15, 16, terrible things that they did wrong. And what else went on those 38 years? And they died, and they died, and they died, and they died, and they died until 603,548 men of war were dead. One of the guys I was training years ago, he came in my office, he says, you know how many funerals a day that is? He said average 44 funerals a day. Every morning you get up in your tent and you go, Ethel, who do we have to go and do funerals today? Well, there's Joe and John and here we go. 44 funerals. Oh my. So do you think Israel got the point? Follow the Lord, you'll live. Don't follow the Lord, you're dead. Their bodies were laid out in the wilderness. 603,548. Only 2 didn't die, whom God had cursed. something else. All right. There's your idea of a survey chart. Tomorrow you need to bring colored pencils, or we will have some, but if you want to bring your own, I always like having my own. I get special colored pencils. So, But anyway, bring some colored pencils. We're going to take the next step of how to see the details in a text. But I hope right now you've learned how to do a survey chart. Practice. The more you do it, the more you learn. Doing it by yourself, picking a small book at first. Take the book of Titus, for example. It's easy, 3 chapters as well. And do a survey chart of it. And start getting a taste for all the things that you can learn. You guys have been great tonight. I appreciate your good diligence in looking at these things. All right?